Hello, my name's Cath Barcan. The title of this presentation is Dead Nature, Repackaging the Still Life. I'll start with a little bit about myself. I'm a fine artist whose main practice is photography. I've been making and exhibiting photographs for over 25 years. I'm delighted to be part of this conference. My work sits squarely in the field of art practice, and I welcome the chance to see how it might articulate to academic and other audiences. In this presentation, I'll share some of my recent fine art photographs that describe the seductive and confounding use of plastic packaging in the commercial sale of food, and the presence of plastic packaging as a ubiquitous part of the contemporary shopping and indeed living experience. The presentation will include some of my fine art photographs and a discussion of their broad historical antecedents in the form of still life painting, especially that from the 17th century Dutch era. I will argue that some of the messages contained in those paintings have a contemporary resonance today. I'll start by showing you an image of a current work in progress. It may feel faintly familiar to you, even though you're unlikely to have seen it before. This is because, despite its obviously contemporary status, it's been created photographically, it includes plastic props. Many of the visual tropes employed in terms of light, composition and content are hundreds of years old. The use of chiaroscuro, literally light-dark, which is the strong use of tonal contrast and directional lighting, is familiar to you from oil painting. It was first explored in depth by artists during the Renaissance. The pyramid composition is also an age-old device, as is fruit, a symbol and allegory. I'd like to give you an overview of the conceptual frameworks that animate my current work. These include the metaphors and allegories of still life paintings in the service of contemporary concerns, and most recently, the impact of plastic in our environment and world. Conflicting and paradoxical relationships between life, death, beauty, time. Stillness and urgency also figure strongly in my work. The warnings and concerns in the work are contextualised in present-day times of environmental crisis. As I talk through the concepts that animate my current practice, we're now looking at a work by Philippe de Champagne from approximately 1671. You can see he sets out very clearly from left to right three of the prevailing themes of the still life genre: life, death and time. The still life has always served as a warning of the fleeting nature of existence and a reminder that the thoughtless behaviour has an ultimate reckoning. To the original viewer, these warnings were of a spiritual and religious nature. In my work, they are transposed to an environmental context, the survivals at stake being various species of this world rather than their everlasting souls. Champagne asks us to consider time. What will last and what will not? I wish to harness aspects of this long visual tradition to create works that deal with conflicting and paradoxical temporal relationships. Still life painters, as you can see in this work, show their skill in representing light and glass and transparency and detail. In this recent work of mine, a seductive translucent bag shimmers in the light. It may have an average life of just minutes in the hands of the consumer, but once disposed of, its life in the environment may span hundreds of years. Sold to us as degradable, it continues to exist in smaller and insidious forms. Like the still life painters, I wish to depict the complex relationships between death, life, beauty, and now toxicity. The bag or jar that seeks to protect, preserve, and contain life may be a source of toxicity or environmental damage. Like the still life painters, I am considering if stillness may just possibly be a way to convey urgency. When I first began making still life photographs, they were much more straightforward in their approach. It was the stillness in still lives that first attracted me to this way of working. Earlier pieces such as this one were simply constructed with strong formal principles. I found it to be an unexpectedly moving experience to be looking in a way that stretched back hundreds of years, engaging in a proleptic dialogue with artists who are long dead. I guess I was seeking to touch base with an admittedly quite romanticised and seemingly long-lost way of life. Doing this, I was photographing fruit and flowers that I had grown myself, in what I found to be an immersive and slow fashion. It was an antidote to the thousands of digital images a photographer might make on any given day, because they can, or in defiance of the multiplicity of images we are bombarded with every day just by going about the course of our daily lives. I'd like to touch briefly a little more on the historical background of still life painting. This can by necessity only be a broad overview of just a few of the many subgenres that make up this rich and complex area of art history. Whilst arrangements of fruit, flowers and food and objects have existed throughout art history, the visual language and conventions that we commonly associate with still life painting began to flourish in the 1600s as Dutch and Flemish painters found a new merchant class willing to buy such paintings. With painters developing such works for their stockrooms rather than relying on the traditional commission model, stilleven, as the Dutch call it, came to be considered a genre in its own right. Previously to this point, these kind of arrangements had existed as part of larger paintings such as mythological or history paintings, but at this point in time it became a genre of its own. Admittedly very low on the rung of hierarchy of genres, but nonetheless a genre independently. So many subgenres exist within this still life area. Flowers and fruit, for example, symbolised fertility, beauty and abundance. Some had specific meaning. For example, the pomegranate represented both fertility and also the many seeds of the church. But within each painting, the warning of the fleeting nature of time and the short duration of life, compared of course to the life of the everlasting soul, was always built in. A flower or fruit that was beginning to decay. The presence of a caterpillar or a butterfly indicated the inevitable journey toward death. Many of these still life vases could never have existed. They often contain flowers that were blossom at different times of the year, so they were often a confection of the artist in the pursuit of the message. If you've been brought up in a Western European tradition, you may or may not know a lot of facts about these type of works, but you probably have absorbed part of their meaning consciously or otherwise by osmosis. Some of these historical works require decoding by the contemporary viewer, with individual elements having specific meanings no longer immediately obvious to us. Others remain the blunt and visceral warnings they were when they were first painted. The most obvious example of such works is the style of painting known as vanitas. From the Latin for emptiness, these paintings were clear warnings on the perils of earthly pleasures, earthly possessions and ambitions. Symbols such as the skull, extinguished candles or an upturned glass were commonly featured. Skulls were frequently placed on books, reminding the viewer of the ultimate futility of earthly knowledge when compared to the everlasting peril of the soul. Vanitas were a type of memento mori, which translates again from the Latin as remember, you must die. Memento mori were a class of artworks or objects designed to remind the viewer of the heavenly consequences of their thoughts, deeds and actions on earth. You can see my simple take on memento mori theme in the current slide. There are no plastic bags in this one. It was, however, a chance and everyday happening that introduced the plastic bag into my work. Taking a break from a photographic session making images such as the one you see on your screen, I went to the local shops and returned home, placing my shopping on the bench. And there I saw it. Bathed in the contrasty afternoon light I was accustomed to waiting all day for, a horrifyingly beautiful and toxic reality. This was our food as we mostly find it, packaged in a plastic bag inside a plastic bag, a babushka doll of packaging replicated in millions of households every day. If you'll indulge me, I'm just going to sneak in some images from a parallel concern of my recent practice, the wrapping and packaging of the landscape, frequently in plastic. Temporary visual spectacles I frequently come across as part of road and other civil works. I include them as I consider them to be a kind of still life, with drapery and curtain-like folds, a kind of contrived environment with more than a little evidence of dead nature. Natura morta, which translates as dead nature, is the name the French gave to the still life form in the late 1800s. I'll finish this presentation with this image from 2016, composed to loosely allude to a horn of plenty, as it brings together some of my overarching conceptual concerns. Is the plastic packaging designed to protect and preserve, in fact, a source of death and toxicity? The blooms will fade and die, but the deathliness and deathlessness of plastic will live on and on. Thank you.